All right, so today we're going to look at 4D, drawing straight line graphs. And we're going to talk through this section about graphing in lots of different ways. But the way you graph a straight line is going to depend on the way the information is presented to you. But first, let's talk a little bit about some basic ideas. All linear equations generate graphs that are straight lines.
Is there a reason why we don't take full C?
Okay, and that's where the word, since they generate equations or lines that are straight lines, that's where the word linear comes from. If you'll notice in mathematics, most things are actually named by their geometric properties. So linear equations are named after the graph, which are straight lines. Now, these lines can be graphed in different ways. And it depends on the type of information that you're given. So they can be graphed first from a table of values, which is what we're going to look at today. Second, you can graph them from a set of points. You might be just given 3, 4, 5 points. They ask you to graph them, and they tell you that it's a linear equation, so then you can graph them. If they don't tell you that it's from a linear equation, then you could just plot the points, but otherwise you draw the line, as we'll talk about today. And finally, we'll look at how to graph them from the equation itself. And all of these are going to require some different skills you're going to need to focus on. And one of the biggest problems that students have in mathematics is not recognizing that the information given will tell you how to approach the problem. It's not good enough to know that you can graph a linear equation with the equation itself. You also have to know how to graph it if you're given a table of values, if you're given a set of points, etc. So your first question to yourself should always be, what are they asking me to do, and what information are they giving me in order to do it? So focus on those things. That should be your first step. So every time, no matter what problem it is, you should always be asking yourself, what kind of problem is it? Or what are they asking me to do? If you slow yourself down and think like that, then it'll trigger some of the information from how to do it, right? You've been great at giving me back information and remembering things from past courses, right? In all this revision work that we've been doing, but sometimes you've had a hard time finding out when to do which thing, right? And that's the key. So study these notes and really think about what it is that you're being asked to do. Okay. So before we start talking about any kind of graphing, we're going to do just a little bit of a revision about the rectangular coordinate system. Now, the rectangular coordinate system, we just usually think of this as a graph. And what you have with the rectangular coordinate system is you have two sets of number lines that meet at 90 degrees. Okay? So it's two number lines. They meet at 90 degrees. In other words, they make perfect corners where they intersect. Okay? That point where they intersect is called the origin. And the reason it's called the origin is because that's where everything starts. If you're going to plot a point on the on the rectangular coordinate system, then you're always going to start counting from that intersection, that point right in the center. Okay? And that is the point where both of the number lines equal 0. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Okay? We need to talk about each one of these lines, each one of these number lines, and these are called axes, plural, or axis. The horizontal axis is your x-axis. And if it's horizontal, then it's moving from left to right. So this particular axis is the x-axis. And again, it's moving left to right. The vertical axis is your y-axis. And these could be called different letters depending on the problems that you're working with, but x and y are typical. And that, of course, is going up and down. And how you know they're moving right or left or up or down is always going to be determined by signs. So keep the sign in mind as you're working with these. That's always going to tell you which direction you're going to begin. All right. So that's just what it looks like and some basic information about it. Let's talk about how to plot points using it. To plot a point, which are called ordered pairs, ordered because the order of them makes a difference. They have to be in a specific order. And pairs because there are always two values. Okay? First, you're always going to begin at the origin. And again, remember the origin simply means that place right in the center. Second, you're going to count your x value. And again, remember, the x value is on the x-axis, which is horizontal. So you're going to go either right or left. And which thing determines which direction you move is the sign. So it's positive, you're going to move to the right. If it's negative, you're going to move to the left. Once you've moved in your x direction, then from that point, don't go back to the origin because you've already traveled some. Think of it like if you're walking somewhere. If you've already traveled down 3 blocks down, you don't want to go back to where you started and then go the next 2 blocks from where you already are. So from that point, you're simply going to count the y value. And again, y is up or down. And again, that is determined by the sign. If your sign is positive, that means you're going to go up. If your sign is negative, that means you're going to go down. Okay? So always keep in mind that idea of an ordered pair. X, comma, y. Okay? So if you can count, you can graph. There's no mathematical skill involved in graphing these. You're just going to be counting. What you do need to always be careful of, though, is the scale of your graph. Because they're not always going to count in ones. They could count in 5s, they could count in 10s, they could count in halves. You must pay close attention to the scale of your graph. Right? So that should hopefully remind you of the pieces of the rectangular coordinate system that allow you to graph. Now let's talk about how to graph using a table. So using a table of values. We've organized a lot of things using a table of values, especially when we were talking about finding numbers and then the next values. When you're organizing a table of values, you'll have a small table divided into 2 rows. Remember that rows go across, columns go what? Up and down. So you're going to have your X values are always the top row, and your Y values are always the bottom row. Always. Okay? X is the top row. Y is the bottom row. And what you're going to do is you're going to create ordered pairs from each column. So the first step is to remember that the X is the top row. Second step is that the Y is the bottom row. And step 3, you're going to make ordered pairs from each column. So I'm just going to do a quick little example here. So we have these. So we have 1, and then 3, 2, then 5, 3, then 7, 4, then 9, 5, and 11. So these ordered pairs would line up to make a straight line. So when I'm doing the ordered pairs, I'm dealing with the columns. So my first column has a 1 in the top and a 3 in the bottom. So that would be the ordered pair 1, 3. So go to the right 1 and then up 3. Right? What you're going to do once you have those values, and you know what values you have, you're simply going to plot each ordered pair. And you're going to plot them one at a time, making sure that you're really careful that it's X, Y. Don't reverse them. And then finally, to complete it, you're going to draw a line through the points that you've plotted. Okay? And importantly, from one edge of the graph to the other. Because even though you don't have points that go all the way across the graph of any linear equation is infinite. It goes on in both directions forever. So you're not going to just plot the points and have a line that stops and starts at the end points. They have to extend beyond them. Now you could, if you wanted to, draw arrows at both ends of the line and indicate the same thing. But the traditional method is to simply draw a line all the way from one edge of your graph to the other. Okay? And once you've done that, you've graphed the chart, you've created your graph of the linear equation, and you're going to move on to the next one. Okay?